Hey, hey.
Welcome.
Just tweeting to our peoples on Twitter.
You're Xing to our people on X.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's the porn site I love the most. So now it's like X space. So Twitter Spaces is now Space X too. It's very confusing.
X spaces X spaces.
I mean, I do love that the logo is entirely a porn aesthetic. Like it is absolutely what a porn company's logo would be. So I do appreciate that. I turns out that I don't know if you saw this, but Elon did or tried to do exactly the same thing with PayPal way back in the day when he was one of the owners of PayPal. He wanted to change it or change one major part of the branding of PayPal to X. And this was when already people were saying, hey, PayPal me that money you owe me. They were using it as a verb. So it had already like taken off and become this whole phenomenon. And he was like, no, let's call it X. And apparently there was a huge fight within PayPal. And I think this might have led to his leaving there. But so this is a thing for him. The branding.
I mean, he named his kid X or like X.
No, I thought he named his kid like an equation.
Yeah.
It was the ultimate Asperger's stem brain decision to name your child an equation. I love that. So no talk about my new set studio or where you are. We have totally new backgrounds. So let's talk about you first.
I forget my what painting is that? Is that what's that dude? Is that Rothko behind you?
Yeah, I it was just 2.5 mil on Sotheby's this last, so I figured I'd pick it up because I needed a background. No, I just snap my fingers and like a replica of Rothko appears. It's quite amazing. If you know the people I know. I'm just saying. Yeah, so might do a little tweaking. But yeah, I'm it's much better than the front of the closet door.
For sure.
And then you are on the run.
Yeah.
You're because you're draft age, right? So that's why you're headed up there.
Yeah, I'm not fighting for Ukraine. I'm not. No Ukrainian ever called me cracker.
Damn straight. Well, you're just not going to fight for Uncle Sam. That's why you're heading to Canada.
Exactly.
That's right, man. I love that. Actually, you're going fishing.
Yeah, I'm going.
But listen, in the time that you're up there, who knows what could happen? So it might be a good place to be. Then again, Canada's even more American than America is these days in terms of politics. So
well, yeah, the Commonwealths of Australia, Canada, New Zealand are the most cucked places on the world.
Yeah, but Canada might be the worst of all of them in terms of like foreign policy, Ukraine, all that stuff. So yeah, Justin will round you up, dude. You're not safe. You got to keep going. Maybe you can find sanctuary in an Inuit village in the Arctic Circle or something for a while.
Well, it's all cabins up there that are hidden away from civilization. So there's plenty of people that don't really interact with the state except for like maybe once every 3 months or something.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of base Canadians out there.
Exactly. Or you could just go to the Aleutian Islands. You could drive to the Aleutian Islands and then take a little ferry across the strait there to Russia, which is what I don't know. It's looking attractive. I saw a video. I've seen actually several videos recently of malls in Moscow, like shopping malls. They're far superior to American shopping malls. They're like gorgeous. There's amazing stuff going on in Russia. And of course, their economy is actually growing now, amazingly, while all the Western economies are shrinking. But this is the time. And I've also heard, and this is where I got into some trouble at Icarus Festival with our guests on stage and a lot of the audience and many YouTube commenters since then. I've never been comfortable with the culture and views of some people on our side of the foreign policy analysis world, people who are opponents of the U.S. war, the proxy war in Ukraine against Russia. Many of them, as I've said, and I've said this for a long time, I think it's pretty clear they have some kind of direct connection with the Russian government. If not, they definitely are saying exactly what the Russian government says, and they never criticize Putin and they never really criticize Russia. So it's, nonetheless, just because of having that position, forces one to have a broader and more incisive analysis of things. Just being oppositional forces you to be smarter. Because of that, a lot of them have excellent takes and critiques. But even people I watch and listen to every single day on this, I don't like how close they are ideologically, rhetorically, and perhaps financially and institutionally to the Russian government. But anyway, I heard yesterday that a lot of those journalists, what you might call dissident journalists, have gotten Russian citizenship. So it's actually true. What I've been saying, that quite a few people on our side, not everybody, and this doesn't mean that we're wrong, but there's a significant number of people, and I've heard that lots. That's the quote. Lots of journalists have gotten from the West who are critical of the Ukraine war and NATO are now Russian citizens. Putin, I think, has actually sort of put that out as an offer. I think he did offer that. He offered that to all dissident Western journalists. If you want to, so Michael, I think you would qualify. If you want to get citizenship in Russia, you can get it. And I don't know if you've seen like the women from Russia, but you got to think about this, man.
Well, the joke is just how quickly they age. Is that they immediately become a babushka overnight. It's either the greatest model you've ever seen in your life, and then you wake up one morning and she's in babushka grandmother beating you with a rolling pin.
I mean, to me, it's like they age psychically immediately. Sort of the Russian, again, if there is anything such thing as the Russian personality.
You are not real men. You are not strong like bear.
There's an ancient soul vibe coming out of a lot of Russians. To me, I get that a lot of sort of cynical, hardened, somewhat you might call cold, hard attitudes about the world and about people, which I can understand being from Russia, being from Eastern Europe at all, given what those people have gone through over the last 100 or so years. Every person who lives in Russia, as we know well, is related to many people who were killed in wars. And that's not just World War II anymore. I mean, since Russia's had so many wars in the last 20 years, it's a god awful legacy. And I think it carries over into the Russian personality. But anyway, so we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot of arguing about movies.
Yeah, this is the show where we talk about movies that we haven't seen.
Right. Well, let me say this about that. Oppenheimer's 3 hours long, and I was going to see it today before we started this, but I saw that it was 3 hours this morning, and I said I can't do that. And but more seriously, we are not pretending to offer any kind of analysis whatsoever of the movies themselves. That would be quite arrogant and stupid. We are simply talking about the rhetoric or the discourse or the debate around the movies, which, of course, is far more important than the movies themselves.
Yeah, Sound of Freedom might be an amazing movie, but Tim Ballard is still a fraud.
Oh, my God. So there's actually, I think Vice just did, and believe me, I know, like half of what Vice says is terrible, but they have a whole new report about how, and this is true. I think this has been demonstrated that he was basically fired from Operation Underground Railroad and started a new group. He was also fired from the Glenn Beck group that he was with, the anti-trafficking group. I forget the name of it.
Oh, yeah, Operation something.
It's got some like Greek god kind of name. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, he was dumped from both. I mean, and recently.
Wow.
There was also this 5-year investigation by the Utah Attorney General against him and Operation Underground Railroad that was dropped all of a sudden a few months ago. But this was after Ballard and the group had given the state of Utah, and this is why libertarians who love these people, I mean, please, they gave, I think, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to the cops, various police departments and sheriff's offices in Utah to conduct, I think I said this before, anti-trafficking stings, and then took credit for what happened, which was the arrest of many adult prostitutes, and then called it that they were saving children and it had nothing to do with children. Anyway, so yeah, I said this weeks ago. I said I said it on Twitter. Tim Ballard is the next Eliza Blue. I have no doubt that whole story and his persona is going to explode in any day now. I don't think it's going to last by the end of the year. I think by the end of the year, I think the right wing who loves him and them will forget about it, and the left will be crowing over the death of the heroes, the momentary heroes of our time. So yeah, it's not looking good. I mean, they're clearly fraudulent, and they're clearly at the very least exaggerate things tremendously, and they clearly, we know this, have been responsible mostly for getting adult prostitutes arrested and saving very few, if any children. It's not even clear they've really saved any child. And if they did, it was a small number compared to
the big scandal I saw is that he took credit for kids who escaped on their own. And
yeah, I didn't even see that. Yeah. No, I mean, I knew about this guy like 5 years ago. He kind of emerged in right-wing media about 5 years ago. I remember hearing him on the Federalist podcast and yelling at my phone as I was listening to it because they were completely credulous and believed everything he was saying, talking about kicking in doors of brothels in Thailand, and I had just found out that was, again, the arrest of adult prostitutes in Thailand. And they were handed over to the government by Operation Underground Railroad and then put in these reformatories where sex workers are held, or prisons in which they're trained to be good and proper women. So, and it's not just him. There's a whole bunch of there's a whole rescue industry. There's many, many organizations like this that do this kind of thing. And it's been shown by many journalists over the years that that's what they do. They simply cooperate with governments in cracking down on adult prostitution. Overwhelmingly. I mean, I'm sure there have been some children who have been saved. I'm sure, but overwhelmingly what and that's the intent from the beginning. The intent was never to save children. It was to stop prostitution. And certainly in this country, I mean, that's really the underlying intent. If you ask any of these people who are favorable toward Operation Underground Railroad and Tim Ballard what they think about prostitution and whether it should be legal, they're all prohibitionists. And that tells you everything, including, unfortunately, a lot of people who call themselves libertarian. And I won't name any names, but there are some quite prominent libertarians on Twitter who just love this stuff and are really excited about all the child saving that's going on, when in fact they're really cheering on authoritarian statists and sort of, quasi cops, basically, is what they are.
Well, remember when libertarianism was sex, drugs, and rock and roll like 10, 15 years ago? Got to bring that back, right?
No, really. I mean, this is kind of, I've been very disappointed in libertarians over the last couple of years for a few reasons. Number one, some major libertarian groups, not all, of course, but were terrible on COVID. I would say Cato was really bad. Reason was so-so. They ended up being good, but they weren't so good at first. Quite disappointing. And then a lot of sort of independent but major libertarians were also very bad on COVID and were pro-lockdown, pro-mask. Cato was just horrendous. And Reason, and I'm going to ask them because I'm friends with those guys. I've been dying to know. I've been wondering about this for a long time, and I'm just going to directly ask Matt Welch or Nick Gillespie or somebody there. Like, they don't cover foreign policy at all, basically. I mean, they'll make a mention of it every once in a while. They took a position on the Ukraine war, though, which was pro-Ukraine and anti-Russia and essentially pro-NATO. And I got to say this. I need them to tell me about why that is. Because, as I've been saying on the show for a long time now, I have had sort of an ongoing revelation over the last couple of years in which I've found out about the history of the CIA's direct involvement with the mainstream media in this country and dictating, in particular, how the news should be covered around foreign policy and international relations. I am not accusing Reason of being in bed with the CIA, but I do need that to be disproven. because there's really no other reason why a major libertarian, very smart publication with very sophisticated ideas and very libertarian ideas for the most part would not say anything about the worst thing that the state can do, which is conduct war. And then why also they take these tepid positions for and favor of NATO. Also, unfortunately, Matt Welch, I know this, and Matt's a friend of mine, and he's owned this, but he and a couple of other Reason writers at the time in 2003, guess what? Supported the Iraq War. So there's a problem in Reason, at Reason, and I need them to at least tell me why, if I'm going to continue being closely allied with them. Yeah, so I don't know. There's some problems within libertarianism, and then among the right libertarians, there's been this other problem, which Reason doesn't have, but right-wing libertarians have. People sort of who identify as anarcho-capitalists, who are around the Mises Institute, the Mises Caucus, especially within the Libertarian Party, who controls the Libertarian Party now. They're basically Trumpists. MAGA, not Trump, because Trump's actually great on these issues, on cultural issues. He's actually a left libertarian for the most part, I think, on cultural issues. MAGA, though, is a bunch of authoritarian Puritans. They are the moral majority type conservatives that we all hated in the 1980s, who want to absolutely put prostitutes in prison and jail drug dealers and all the things. So many libertarians have bought into that, and in recent years, and it's extremely depressing because on those issues, I mean, that's where libertarians made their bones, kind of as what you were saying. I mean, originally libertarians were known as the people who were, pro-drug, and they'd often get made fun of for that. And they were the only people in the world who were proposing that we legalize prostitution. But now that's not really happening anymore. Very few libertarians are taking those positions. And in fact, they're looking just sort of like right-wing authoritarians and statists. But what do you think?
Well, I was just thinking about the Tom Woods line about Nick Sarwark, where he said, I'm not saying he's a CIA asset, but if he was, he couldn't be doing a better job, which is what you could say about Reason sometimes.
I should have asked them this. I don't know why. I don't think they've ever really covered foreign policy, and maybe there is some good reason for it. But I mean, in fact, at one point I was gonna ask, I was gonna apply basically and ask them to make me their foreign policy like columnist or something, because they need it. They need someone. Mm-hmm. But I think it's because they have bad politics on foreign policy.
Well, yeah, a lot of libertarians see libertarianism as a means to the end of liberalism. Mm-hmm. In that they're basically liberals, but they think that free markets will get us to that same result. And so they pretty much follow the line on everything. And they want to be invited to the nice parties in DC where they get to hobnob with other journalists and actual politicians. So they don't see themselves as oppositional to the power structure. They see themselves as a fun, friendly alternative to a two-party system.
Well, people have said that libertarians have become irrelevant in recent years, and I think it's more that they've become non-existent in recent years. So I've described each of the major wings of libertarianism and shown how each has demonstrated extremely non-libertarian ideas in recent years, meaning they've either become MAGA or they become Democrat Party liberals. On big issues, not on everything, but on big issues. So there's very few people out there who I really consider to be genuinely small L libertarian these days. And I can think a lot of libertarians and even a lot of so-called anarchists. And I'm thinking of a couple in particular who are very high profile, have taken essentially authoritarian statist positions on major issues recently, especially having to do with culture, sex work, drugs, the whole grooming thing, and
well, there's a lot of phenomenon that drive people to that, like the libertarian to alt-right pipeline, in my opinion, or the libertarian to hyper religious pipeline. Our friends excluded who went down that pipeline. A big motivating factor of libertarianism is just the desire to be the smartest guy in the room, and if you surround yourself in a room of libertarians, you're no longer the smartest guy in the room by being a libertarian. So all these individualists who are contrarians have to find a more extreme position to latch onto and see themselves as evolved and better than who they used to be, you know?
Yeah. Well, they are essentially non-existent in my view. I think there's very few people who can genuinely call themselves libertarian these days. And
well, they're out there. They just aren't necessarily politically active, because being politically active is the opposite of being a libertarian.
Oh, there's lots of people who are effectively libertarian without even knowing it.
Or I would still have a Ron Paul bumper sticker and haven't paid attention to politics in a decade. Sure. You know?
Yeah. So yeah, let's move on from those people because they are, as I said, either irrelevant or non-existent now. Sorry to say, but yeah. So we have a lot to talk about. So Barbie and Oppenheimer, and everybody's been talking about these movies for the last week. Let's go down sort of what the discourse around the movies is, because I think that's actually, as I said, that's the most important thing. And I think it's quite important to understand. So the right-wing take on Barbie is that it is unabashedly, relentlessly, not just feminist, but misandrist, anti-male, man-hating. And the thesis, according to them, of the movie is that women don't need men, and women are better, and men should just be in subservient positions, subordinate positions, I guess, like Ken is in the movie, but that women don't need men and should go their own way. We live in a new age in which women could do anything, et cetera, et cetera. And they're quite upset about it, to the extent that I've actually heard there is a movement. I don't know if you heard this. There's a movement among quite serious right-wing kind of commentators to actually sue the filmmakers for false advertising, but because apparently in all the promotion leading up to the premiere of the movie, the stars and the director and the producers were saying to the media, oh, it's not feminist, and we love men, and it's pro men, and it's not feminist at all. And apparently, according to the right wing, it is actually thoroughly misandrist feminist. So we'll see. I'm curious what people who've seen it have to think about it. But that's the right wing's very upset about this. And I don't, I think that's true. I mean, I would guess that it's true. I haven't seen the movie, but it's certainly true for feminist politics generally in America over the last 10 to 20 years has gone decidedly misandrist. The good old days of Me Too and Jessica Valenti drinking men's tears. She wore that shirt, but it's sort of like very cool, still is, but it was super cool during Me Too to say things that were just explicitly outright anti-male sexist. It was completely not just okay, but it was actually encouraged to be an anti-male sexist. And that still lingers. And I think Barbie might be, again, I haven't seen it, but it might be a holdover from the Me Too era in that way, or it could be, because I've seen less of that, I have to say. There's been less sort of Me Too stuff going on in recent years, thank God. But the right wing could be just still sore from that time and assuming that we're still in the Me Too era with Barbie. I don't know.
Yeah, a thesis that in a very, very long 2-thread extended tweet thing that Richard Hanania put out is that this movie can be understood as feminism throwing in the towel. All of its feminist critiques are kind of flat and incoherent, and there's no real call to action that makes any sense. And it's just a bunch of feminist like talking points and jokes that fall flat. And we lost that. I have horrible Wi-Fi, but hopefully that was Thad's end and he'll come back soon. But yeah, I'll read that review of Barbie real quick. He says, the message ends up being subversive despite itself. The feminist complaining in the film lacks any direction or solid program. And what's supposed to be the crescendo, Gloria, America Ferrera, gives a speech about how women are expected to be perfect moms, smile, be sexy, not sluts, not be selfish, blah, blah, blah. There's very little politics in the sense of political demands. Rather, it's completely about how norms, expectations, and how hard it is to be a woman because of how people see and judge you. It's almost as if the women's problem is their baseline higher levels of anxiety and difficulty adjusting to what is ultimately a more individualistic society than conditions we evolved under. The mainstream right-wing view was, oh, that's back.
Sorry, push the wrong button.
Uh-huh.
I was bathing in men's tears. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, I think it's just important to know sort of what the debate is around the movie. Of course, the left, as far as I can tell, just likes it and is sort of just celebrating it. I don't think they have much to say about it, except that it's great. Of course, yes, it's true. Women don't need men anymore.
Yeah.
And it should go their own. To which I say, great. I mean, go your own way then. Go mine coal and fix the power lines and fight in Ukraine. You know, you don't.
I did the even more torturous task of watching Ben Shapiro's review, his 45-minute review of Barbie at double speed.
Why would you? Wait, Ben Shapiro's voice at double speed?
Yeah.
Went through that? Okay.
But yeah, which is quadruple speed for normal people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think he's missing the point, and I think a lot of people who are complaining about the politics of this are missing the point in that, like, when I talk about myself and when people ask if I'm a feminist, I say, well, I was born in the West in 1996, and it was impossible not to be a feminist. Like, there are so many feminist assumptions that are just built into the water supply right now that we can't escape. And I think the politics of this are really just an aesthetic. Like, Barbie is the original girl boss, and the only way that these liberal screenwriters can think about this is in the context of a world of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and of feminism and all that. So that's their only milieu that they can operate. So they just use feminist as an aesthetic backdrop, like Quentin Tarantino uses violence.
It's wallpaper.
Yeah.
It's the wallpaper in the house we all live in.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, we've all been trained to some extent to be feminists in this country from birth, even if our parents are anti-feminist. Mm-hmm. We get messages from every direction to be feminist since I was a kid. And I mean, I was trained from the get-go. Of course, I come from a left-wing milieu, but still, I mean, I am fundamentally, profoundly, reflexively feminist, and sometimes to a fault. And I wish I weren't in some cases. But yeah, I just assume that women are equal and should be treated equally. Mm-hmm. And that's why, although I have to say, in recent years, hanging out with you and right-wing people a lot, that faith has been shaken at times. And I think it's actually does a disservice, especially to women in particular, because so many women, not for biological reasons, but for whatever reason, simply would rather be moms and not go into the coal mines or into the power lines or into Ukraine. They would rather be moms. And that's been very clear. Now, some women do, want to be Samantha Power or Madeleine Albright or whoever, Carly Fiorina. But large numbers don't. And so imposing this idea that women not only are equal, but should be treated just like men, I guess, is really damaging and wrong. So I refrain. I'm trying to refrain from that and I'm just more open to sort of anti-feminist critiques, I guess. Mm-hmm. That's mostly your influence.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah. And my anti-feminism is kind of like my anti-racism and my anti-liberalism in general. Yeah. In that a lot of it is like from that book. Shoot, what's his name?
Who?
The guy you don't like. NYU. yeah. NYU professor, The Righteous Mind, right?
Oh, Haidt. Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt. Yeah,
Haidt. Right. Yeah. Jonathan Haidt.
But he basically says that liberal assumptions and liberal worldview that we take as the only way to live is what he calls weird, Western, industrialized, educated, rational, democratic. And that is just a blip on the radar of all of human experience. Like billions of people today don't live like that. And most people throughout all of history didn't live like that. So to, think that there's only one way to live and dismiss the plurality of experiences is just ignorant and racist almost.
Huge point. Yeah. Huge point. Huge perspective, really, to have. I do not hate Haidt. In fact, I think he has a lot of good things to say, and that's one of them. I have some issues with him. He's an institutionalist. He wants to save the universities. Mm-hmm. He thinks they're worth saving. And he's sort of an establishment, basically psychology, I would say. But no, he has some major points about the psychology of the left in particular. You know, we learned a lot about the left and liberalism from him. I mean, what really makes these people tick, which is, I think, what we should all do for all political ideologies, because to me, all political ideologies are simply projections of internal psychic drama. And so doesn't mean that, you know, if it's proven that you have a particular position on a political issue, because your mom treated you poorly, doesn't mean you're wrong about that politics. But I think it's important to understand why people take the positions they do. Yeah, no, I mean, this is huge. Yeah, this thing that we have created here in the West in the 20th century, maybe you could say it's, you know, maybe 200 years at most, we're talking, in just a little sliver of the world, Western Europe and America. Democracy is a crazy idea. A very small minority of people have lived under democracies. More importantly, and here's the thing, a tiny, tiny minority of human beings who have lived on the earth have ever expressed or demonstrated a desire for democracy. They don't want it. They want their kings and their queens and their dictators sometimes. Yeah, believe it or not, we only pay attention to the rebels, right? The Enlightenment liberal only pays attention to the anti-monarchical rebels. In terms of when we write history, when we pay attention to politics, those are the people who get the play. Sort of like the civil rights movement in this country. The civil rights movement in the United States was less than 1% of the African-American population participated in it. And we also know that large numbers opposed the civil rights movement. They opposed racial integration. But most African Americans in this country at that time in the 1950s and 60s just didn't give a shit. Just didn't care who ran the government. And if asked, probably would have said, yeah, it's fine. I don't care. Let Lyndon Baines Johnson be president. I don't want to be. But we don't pay attention to those people. We only pay attention to the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Rosa Parkses and the Martin Luther Kings. Same with all the dissidents in the history of monarchies and dictatorships. I am totally sure that the vast majority of people who lived in those societies, like Saddam Hussein's Iraq, for instance, Putin's Russia, and he's not even nearly as authoritarian, but whatever. I mean, Putin sort of shows that this has become like this religion that if we see what we think to be an autocrat, we immediately assume he's illegitimate among the people. And we focus then on the Navalny's, the rebels, the dissidents. And we say, see, those are the real Russians. Those are the real people. The people don't want the dictator. The people don't want the king. We assume that. We assume that as Westerners.
You know, I get a lot in my inboxes as being a political commentator with somewhat of a wide global audience. I get a lot of speeches in my DMs by Gaddafi saying, by different people saying how much they love that guy and how much,
Iraq, I mean, Saddam Hussein, he wouldn't have been there that long if he didn't have a base of support. And Gaddafi was hugely popular among, again, major swaths of the population. Were there dissidents and rebels and people who wanted to kill him and take over? Of course. Were there critics, intellectual critics of Gaddafi in Libya? Of course. But you'll find, I'm sure for every one of those, you'll find 10 or 100 or 1,000 people who love the guy, or at least wanted him to be the ruler. That's the thing. Most people in all countries don't care about politics and governance. They just don't care. They leave that to other people to do. And so long as their immediate life is okay, they're not going to do anything about it. And they just don't care how it's delivered. They don't want to participate. Most people, here's an announcement, liberals, most people in the world, including in the United States, do not want to participate in governing. They don't want it. Meaning they don't want democracy. They don't want to be democratic. They don't want to govern. Most people don't want to govern. Show me evidence that there has ever been a society on Earth in which a majority of the people wanted to govern through democratic processes. You will not find it. This is the biggest farce the biggest intellectual political farce possibly in history that the West has imposed on the world. And then what the West did over the last 100 years is kill about 100 million people in the name of spreading this thing that people don't want. They use it as a pretext. They use it democracy, then they use human rights. Of course, democracy they consider to be the most important human right. They invented the idea of human rights in 1943, 1944, the UN Charter, and then they've just fought wars to uphold these rights around the world, rights that most people don't want. It reminds me of all the talk about Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and how women are poorly treated in those countries. And then I saw polls of women in Afghanistan during the war, during the occupation by the US, and it was something like a third, some big chunk of women in Afghanistan wanted the Taliban to rule. Of course, because they live there, because they're Muslims, because they believe in Sharia law, of course, because they're Muslims. And they don't want, and then women in Saudi Arabia, when they started to grant some rights to women in Saudi Arabia recently, a lot of women there were like, I don't want it. I want to be driven around. I don't want to drive the car. Driving sucks. I mean, I get it. It's responsibility that a lot of people don't want. The responsibility of public life, responsibility for the economy, responsibility for, generating wealth. That's a lot. And it's been men's lot for millennia, and it's not all fun and games. The idea that it's fun or good or happy to be a man is crazy. Sure, we have more public power, but it doesn't make us happier. No one wants that.
There's a Henry David Thoreau quote that most men live lives of quiet desperation.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Well, I think he was talking more about sort of ordinary men. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of the men that the feminists hate, the men that the feminists point to.
The apex.
The ones with the power, the ones with institutional power, right? And say, see what men, they get that power, they hoard it, and they keep us from having it.
If you think, if you think that like these billionaire CEOs and politicians are like the ultimate Ubermensch, free and just ruling over everybody all the time and are just dominating everything, like look at their schedule. Look at the hours that they have to subject themselves to. Look at how little sleep they get. Look at how little they get to see their family. Look at how little time they have for fun. It's torture. Who wants that life?
Being like a sovereign office holder, like a mayor, from mayor to president, or being the CEO of a major corporation, I couldn't imagine a worse hell. You will not know your children, and your children will hate you, almost for sure. And you'll have little to no experience with your spouse, and you'll have no life outside of work. And maybe that's what you want, and that's fine. And I'm glad there are people out there who do that. But it is not enviable, not for most of us. So shit, my first career goal was, Michael, it was to be a house husband. Because that sounded good to me. I was like, you get to stay home all day and just like cook and clean. I like that stuff. I like doing laundry and cooking. And I don't have to go out there and fight in the market. Yeah.
So we got some super chats rolling in. Donald with the 20, just a simple W.
That's right, Donald. We're just right about everything. Correct. And so are you, sir. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And then from Rumble, Fuego de Bacero, one of our followers on Rumble. Thanks for the Sam Husseini talk you posted. Great stuff. My grandfather was in some kind of chemical warfare unit in the Pacific in World War II. Husseini's talk connected some dots for me.
Wow. Yeah, the origin is the Japanese military. Although I'd like to see us delve into that. But the story is, and this is Sam's story too, and my story at the moment, is that the US got the idea for a bioweapons program from the Japanese, or they were trying to counter what the Japanese were doing. And they used some of the techniques that the Japanese invented at Fort Detrick after 1943. The bioweapons program here was launched at Fort Detrick in Maryland in 1943 during the war. And so, I mean, it's not surprising if your grandfather or great what was it was in the
Grandfather.
Pacific. Grandfather was in the Pacific dealing with that issue, because I know they were aware of it and were probably trying to counter it and develop their own bioweapons, because and this is a good segue to Oppenheimer, isn't it? But the attitudes toward the Japanese during World War II. My own father, who was a socialist, leftist, Berkeley guy, but of that generation. He was a silent generation, so he was like 10 years old during World War II. He was 10 years old in 1943. So he remembers it well. To the day he died, he referred to the people of Japan as Japs. And very casually so, and would go on and on and on about the atrocities committed by the Japanese in the Pacific, which all true as far as I know. But the dehumanization and demonization of the Japanese as a race during World War II is something that is off the charts. And I think everybody should read John Dower's brilliant book on this. What was it called? War Without Mercy. It's about the Pacific War, and it's about the dehumanization. And this is the brilliance of that book, John Dower's book. He actually looks at both sides. You'll almost never see this. He shows the dehumanization of the Japanese by Americans and of the Americans by the Japanese at the time, because it was going on both directions. It's an absolutely brilliant book. The thing is, of course, the U.S. not only won the war, they were always going to win the war. There was no way that Japan was ever going to win that war. One of the things that people need to think about a little bit more, that Japan never had any chance to win that war, which means to me that they were forced into it. But anyway, yeah. And so this is why spreading chemicals over cities full of civilians was not debated. Now we have this debate about using cluster munitions in Ukraine and how horrible that is. Even among a lot of people, a lot of Democrats who are pro-Ukraine did not like this because it was, violated human rights. Well, we didn't believe in human rights in Japan in the 1940s. Believe you me. And so that's what Oppenheimer, as I understand it, is about. I mean, that context is where it's situated. And dropping the nukes, same thing. There was, how did people respond to the dropping of atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Was there hand wringing and lots of concern about the children's skin being melted off and vaporized, and the hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians dying in an instant? Was there hand wringing? Yeah, the pacifists. There were about 100 or 200 pacifists who remained steadfast throughout the war and who are my greatest heroes and were the most brilliant and courageous intellectuals of all time. Yeah, they issued some, condemnations of this. They were very upset about this, but there were giant parties in the streets of every American city in response to it. And now I understand that on one level, a big level, which is that if you ask any veteran of the Pacific War, I doubt there's a veteran of the Pacific War who will say something different than this. They loved it because those guys were getting ready to invade mainland Japan. And given how fierce the Japanese military had fought up until that point, defending every little island that they had captured in some of the most vicious battles in human history, some ways they were the most vicious battles in terms of techniques used and the weaponry that was employed. The killing was in some ways more vicious and spectacular than almost any other war ever. They thought, well, if they did this on these little tiny islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, defending these islands to the last man, willing to die for this, what are they going to do when we try to invade their homeland, the mainland of Japan, and threaten their very emperor? They're going to fight us to the last child on that island. And I understand that. And so veterans of the war, the guys who were GIs in the Pacific at the time, if I were a GI in the Pacific at the time, I probably would have been pretty relieved, at least. I'd like to think I wouldn't have celebrated the use of the nukes on hundreds of thousands of civilians, but I sure would have been relieved because I would not want to go ashore and try to invade Tokyo in 1945. The debate about Oppenheimer is, I don't know if there's a lot of debate. It's not as fierce as about Barbie, but there has been criticism of it that it did not depict the suffering, the consequences of the bombs, that it didn't show the bodies, the corpses, the melted arms and limbs, the children lying in the streets, the stacks, piles of corpses. They had afterward in Hiroshima. This was actually in every city because there was firebombing before the nuclear bombs were used, and people don't even know this. The firebombing of Tokyo was far worse than Hiroshima. I mean, they absolutely leveled Tokyo. Everyone should go just look at pictures. Just Google Tokyo 1945, and you'll see there was not a structure left, not a structure in Tokyo, right? The capital, the biggest city, major world city, not a structure left. They burnt every single thing with a series of firebombs, and they killed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. So anyway, that's the debate, is that there's not enough depiction of the carnage. And I don't even know, I'd have to see the movie to judge that. I'm not sure. And then other people are countering back and saying, that's not what the movie is about. The movie is about one man's moral struggle with his invention of the greatest killing machine in history. So anyway, that's where we are with that. But it does remind us of a lot of core issues in American history, in international relations, in the history of racism and race. And I would say what we're doing now with Russia, by the way, is very similar to the dehumanization of the Japanese during World War II. There's a lot of demonology, not just of Putin, but of Russians generally. There's a lot of celebrating Russian death. You'll see this among, Malcolm Nance on MSNBC loves to talk about killing Russians. Lindsey Graham talked about how wonderful it was they were killing Russians. It's absolutely respectable and even encouraged to be an anti-Russian racist these days. And it's very similar to the demonization of the Japanese during World War II. And if we ever do drop a nuclear bomb on the Russians, I know that Malcolm Nance and Lindsey Graham and thousands of good liberals, Harry Truman was a good liberal, they will have a party in the streets. No doubt about it. Because liberals, guess what, it turns out, are the most bloodthirsty of all.
Have you read the essay from 1981 in The New Republic by Paul Fussell, Thank God for the Atom Bomb? You remember that one?
Well, Paul Fussell is one of the greatest war historians of all time. And he's written books that depict what it was like, especially in World War I, that are still considered to be the sort of the highest achievements of, I guess, histories of war that really convey what it was like on the battlefields. But no, I haven't read that essay.
Yeah. What?
Go ahead. What did he say in it?
He basically kind of runs down kind of what you were saying about firebombing and just the brutality of the Pacific Theater in general. In that, like, the slaughter in Okinawa was 120,000, and that was just a few weeks before 140,000 are killed in Hiroshima. And the firebombings that happened, if the war is going to continue going on, that's potentially 7,000 or more dead a week. So basically,
there were 31 major cities in Japan in 1941. By the end of the war, 30 had been firebombed. They only left Kyoto because of it, because they had the idea that if they let the emperor survive, they would be better able to control the population during the occupation. They firebombed 30 cities. Firebombed. And the thing about that is they knew going into the war that Japan's cities were made mostly of wood. Most of the buildings in Japan in the early 20th century were made of wood. and I've actually read the studies that were done by the War Department and the Council on Foreign Relations about how dropping incendiary devices in those cities would do the trick really nicely. And that's exactly what happened. What we did to the Japanese in World War II is the greatest atrocity ever committed against a people. I mean, that is as close to real genocide as I've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, the percentage, I don't know, it's something like 10 or 20% of men were killed, something like that. And it was absolutely genocidal. I mean, you dropped 2 nuclear bombs on cities after firebombing every other city. Actually, they'd already firebombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki anyway, but they nuked them anyway. No, and then what we did to the Japanese in America, not just the internment, but stealing all their land with the alien land laws in 1921 in California. The progressive governor, Hiram Johnson, one of the biggest progressives in the country, big champion of labor and women's suffrage and civil rights and welfare. And yeah, he's the one who signed that law, which took away the farms, the land, the property of Japanese citizens of America, and then gave it over to white farmers. Why? Because the Japanese farmers were so good and productive. They were out competing white farmers who were complaining, and took it to the state legislature in Sacramento and demanded that the government take the land back from the Japs and give it to them. That's what happened. So yeah, I mean, look how they bounced back. One of my son's roommates in college is a Japanese American. His grandparents were in the camps. I mean, now he's at an elite college doing great, and his dad's successful. I mean, it's just incredible. And I do think about all the talk about white supremacy and its effects on people. When I think about the history of Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans, for that matter, the Chinese Exclusion Act, lynchings in the streets of San Francisco and Los Angeles were a regular thing against Chinese and then later Japanese in the 19th century and early 20th century. All sorts of laws discriminating against Chinese and Japanese, barring them from immigration entirely. All immigration from Asia was stopped after 1924. Yeah, and now look at the Chinese now. Look at the Chinese in America. How are they doing now? How are the Japanese doing now in America? And I always think, if anybody has felt the boot of white supremacy on their necks, it's those people. But look where they are now in less than a century. So when I hear about how suffocating and devastating white supremacy is in 2023 for a college student at Yale or someplace, how they couldn't possibly succeed in this society given the ubiquity of racism, a little bit done. Go talk to your Japanese friends.
Yeah. Yep. So, but on the point of the bomb, well, do you think it was a necessity to prevent the invasion of Tokyo and all that?
No, almost definitely not. First of all, Stalin had sent the Red Army. They were poised to invade the mainland of Japan. And no one knows, because Truman never said. No one knows for sure. But the leading theory about why he dropped the bomb is actually to stop the Soviets from controlling Japan. Mm-hmm. And if you control Japan, you basically control the Pacific. And they couldn't have that. I mean, this is a long historical story, but all the way back to the 19th century, American war strategists had said, controlling the Pacific is the most important objective for the United States. We must defeat Japan and control the Pacific. So Franklin Roosevelt grew up on that ideology that we must defeat Japan. And so the idea, and the Red Army was ready to take over. They were right there, ready to take over. And Truman dropped the bomb and occupied it instead and kept Stalin out. So we also know that there have been many communications, and this is well documented, by high officials in the Japanese government at the time seeking a settlement, seeking a peace treaty. And yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, they had no way of winning at that point. They were done. They had lost every single island. Half their military was dead. I mean, they had children working in war factories at that time. By 1943, most of the munitions made in Japan were made by teenagers. People don't know that. I mean, there was such an incredible shortage of men and labor because of the war, because they'd lost so many, that's what they were reduced to. There was famine, there was mass starvation in Japan at that time. There was just no chance. And if they had simply just blockaded it, they would not have even had to invade. They could have just blockaded it, because again, Japan was absolutely dependent on imports for almost everything. They couldn't grow enough food for themselves. They didn't have any oil. They had to import every ounce of oil. You know, they weren't going to survive if we had just blockaded it with our massive, overwhelming navy. No, there's many arguments for why it was unnecessary. Gar Alperovitz wrote the first book on that. It's well worth checking out. But again, I understand from the GI's point of view, sitting there on some boat in the Pacific, being told that they're going to invade the mainland. I get it, but those GIs didn't know what was going on. The GIs didn't know what was happening in the White House. They didn't know what was happening in Tokyo. They didn't know any of this stuff. All they knew was what they saw in front of them and what was maybe reported in the news. So
my understanding is that Japan was seeking a conditional surrender at the time.
Yeah.
And the main condition was you keep the emperor as a figurehead and you keep cultural institutions in place.
Yeah.
And the United States was bent on unconditional surrender, and the geopolitical thing of releasing the bomb was also on there. But when you think about it, MacArthur pretty much gave them all those conditions. Like he kept the emperor in there for a brief period of time, and yeah, he worked with the Japanese government to rehabilitate Japan. Like in all practicality, those conditions were entirely reasonable and almost inevitable if you wanted to actually rebuild Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they did impose a whole lot of American values in the educational system. I mean, people don't realize this. It was an absolute colony for years. Under MacArthur was the king of Japan, and then he was replaced by another general, and who was a king. They were kings of Japan. They oversaw the police forces, law enforcement. I mean, all the major political decisions had to go through them, these American generals. But they did impose a lot of American culture, sort of high culture on Japan, but mostly they made sure that the old aggressive Japanese nationalist culture was eradicated. That was the main thing. They just wanted to do away with that. And guess what? You haven't really seen it since. Mishima was like the last little glimpse of that.
The image of samurais being carried out by Western police officers.
I mean, they annihilated it, and they annihilated the people who carried it, that culture, those ideas about the Japanese nation, and you know, who were anti-colonialist and anti-Western. They killed most of them, just killed them on the battlefields, or they executed them. And then they annihilated their culture in the schools after the war that they controlled. And it's amazing that Mishima actually came out of that and still managed to be a Japanese nationalist the way that he was. But I mean, he represented a very, very tiny and quickly dying little legacy.
Mm-hmm. I know you think this discourse is beneath you, but do you believe that nuclear weapons are real?
Do I believe that nuclear weapons are real?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Like, in the same way that a lot of people think that we never went to the moon, there are people out there who believe that nuclear weapons don't actually exist, that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were just firebombed. And
I've never heard this one.
Oh, yeah?
Never. Wow. Okay. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it's true.
I listened to a lot of Owen Benjamin, and him and Jack Mason are my two favorite guys.
Yeah.
Because all they are about is eradicating fear. And he basically says that the narrative of the bomb is basically to control you and to keep you up at night and keep you thinking that the people in charge could end the world at any moment. And if you just realize that all that shit's fake, then you can just go out and live your life.
So Owen thinks it's fake?
Yeah.
He thinks Hiroshima was fake.
Well, he thinks Hiroshima and Nagasaki were firebombed into submission, but he thinks that the bomb itself is fake and largely a psychological tactic to intimidate other countries and keep the population, scared and
So Okay, so this, I think about this, what I think about 9/11 trutherism, which is that I don't think the physical evidence is there for that position, but in a way I don't care because the politics of it is right. The politics of trutherism is right, which is that the neocons and the US government and the foreign policy establishment and the military industrial complex all benefited tremendously from 9/11. Clearly, that's the politics of it. The politics of this, as I understand it, is also correct, which is that, and this was Noam Chomsky's argument, which is quite brilliant. Noam Chomsky's actually made some good points in his time, in his 393 years on this planet, which is that it was a message that Truman dropped the bomb, according to Chomsky, to keep the Soviets out of Japan and out of the Pacific, but also to send a message to the rest of the world that if you ever fuck with us, this is what we'll do to you. We're gangsters and we run this place and we will fucking kill you in the most vicious way imaginable if you ever challenge our supremacy. We have not been living under white supremacy. We've been living under American supremacy. That's what the religion of the world has been since 1945. But if Truman didn't intend that, it certainly was the effect. Except, the Koreans and the Vietnamese were like, wait a minute, maybe we can fuck with them. Maybe they won't drop a bomb on us. Not a nuclear bomb. But yeah, so no, that's the politics of this are correct.
Yeah, same deal with Iran, right? Iran and North Korea. Like, imagine everything that's been done to, they're going to get a weapon. We have to keep them at bay. We have to support Israel indefinitely. If you just believe, those nukes are fake and that's completely manufactured, you basically arrive at the same politics that we have.
Yeah. I mean, the nukes certainly are used for that purpose, to maintain American hegemony. But you good? Oh.
Yeah. I'm good.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's the politics of the two big movies of the summer. I don't know if I can ever make it to a 3-hour movie anymore. And I don't know if I can watch 2 hours of Pink with Barbie.
Well,
although I
feel like movie has to be 3 hours now because nobody goes to the movies and like the studios have to make you feel like you got your money's worth,
Is that why they do it?
I think so. That's the big thing with the Marvel movies, like especially like Endgame, everything has to be 3.5 hours. It's an epic giant thing happening, Nobody goes to the movie for like a 90-minute little fun romp.
The decline of Hollywood in terms of the quality of the product is actually an argument against not globalism, but against globalization and against international trade. It's actually an argument for protectionism. Because those movies, most of the movies made, the big movies made by the studios nowadays, are made for Asia. They're made for the Asian market. They're made for Asian young people. That's why we have all these Marvel movies. That's why we have all these comic book movies. And that's because we have an open international trading system. And capitalists are totally incentivized to appeal to foreign markets. So if we actually made it illegal to sell movies to other countries, we would have better movies. And you know what? I hate Hollywood so much and the movies they make so much now. I hate Marvel so much that I'd actually be for that. Fine. I don't care. I'm just going to say it. Speaking of authoritarians, I'm just going to be authoritarian on this. I think we should not allow, I think it should be illegal, punishable by prison time, to sell movies, to distribute movies outside of the borders of the United States. What do you think?
Well, the joke is that there's the woke cut that gets distributed to the United States with the lesbian kiss. And then there's the unwoke cut where the lesbian kiss is taken out that gets distributed to the rest of the world. And that a lot of the politics that conservatives don't like or don't exist in other countries where they don't care or tolerate that stuff.
I mean, but isn't it true, though, that all the movies now are basically made for Asian teenagers?
Yeah.
That's the demo when they write the script?
Certainly like Fast and Furious and Marvel. Yeah, for sure.
Which is that's Hollywood now.
Yeah. The cheapest possible IP and then the most explosions you can fit. And then rinse and repeat.
Yeah, there's like, God damn. I mean, people like talking to each other doesn't happen anymore in a movie. Like dialogue, like actual dialogue about like relationships. You don't see that in movies anymore. So let's move on to.
Well, there's a naked woman shooting at the streets in San Francisco.
Oh, you want to talk about Gotham? So you want to talk about Gotham, or you want to talk about World War III?
Well, let's talk about Gotham.
Show the video.
Oh, you want me to show the video?
If you have it.
I do have it.
So my town is absolutely, I now have confirmation that it is the worst city in the country. And in some ways, yeah, even worse than St. Louis and Baltimore, because I don't know if you have that available, Michael, but the stats on homelessness came out in the cities, or actually I think the San Francisco city government actually commissioned a study of homelessness in every American city and found is staggering. The top 4 cities in homelessness rates, meaning number of homeless per capita in the cities, the top 4 cities in the whole United States of America are, in order, San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, they even included small cities, and San Jose. I mean, and they're all in the Bay Area. They're all right here. That's how many homeless we have. And the next biggest city in terms of homelessness is not even close. I think it's Denver. Like has, I think, less than half or a third, has a third of the homelessness rate that we have. And we have that in 4 cities here. The 4 biggest cities in the Bay Area all have the highest homelessness rates in the country. Then we have these incidents, these crimes happening in public that are so spectacular and so brazen and so just, I don't even know what to say about them, but they're happening all the time in the news. And it actually is beginning to resemble Gotham City here. So, do you have any? Can you show anything?
Well, I mean, I don't want to show the video of a naked woman shooting into the streets.
Why not?
I don't know. We're on YouTube, and I don't like sharing snuff essentially. But
okay, so yesterday, I think it was Monday or I think it was Tuesday. Actually, it's Tuesday.
Also, my browser's super slow, so I can't. But I do have some videos I can show. But yeah.
Okay. Doesn't matter. People can look it up. Tuesday, middle of the day, 2 days ago, middle of the day, on the eastbound span of the Bay Bridge. Sort of, this is after you get off the bridge and you're driving into Oakland. So it's Oakland. It's the Oakland side of the Bay Bridge. Rush hour. It was rush hour. This woman stops her car. I think it's 4 or 5 lanes, right in the middle. Gets out. She's stark naked, but she's carrying a gun in one hand and a knife in the other hand. And she starts walking down the freeway and shooting at people in their cars randomly as they're driving by. Okay, then I'm hearing a car crash right now. I'm not kidding you. That's crazy. Oof. That was a really bad car crash. Day before that, on the Sanchez Street steps in San Francisco, 5 kids carjacked a Lincoln Town car and then drove it. Everybody should look at this video. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And then drove it off the edge of this huge wall, basically. And it flew through the air and crashed upside down on a street below, on the sidewalk on the street below. I mean, it fell like 30 feet and crashed on. And then 5 people they were amazingly, nobody's killed. I don't think there's any major injuries. They all got out of the car and then ran away. This carjackings are like every day now. And what the problem is, a lot of them are teenagers who do this. So they don't know how to drive. And so they carjack a car and then they think they have to drive 100 miles an hour to get away, but they can't control the car. So they crash into other cars or people, they kill people. And it's like a culture now. And I just don't see this. I know there's crime in other cities like this. The other thing that is happening in Oakland more than, I swear to God, and please, people, let me know if this is happening in places like St. Louis or Baltimore, because I haven't heard about it. But now the big thing in Oakland is having shootouts on the freeways. So the 580 is the main freeway that cuts right through Oakland. And I used to live just a block and a half from the 580. Everybody, I said this before, Google 580 freeway and shootout. And you'll see like dozens, I'm not kidding, of news stories over the last 5 to 10 years. And especially recently, and a 8-year-old girl, I think it was just hit. She was in a car on the 580. This is like last week, and she got hit and she's in critical condition in the hospital. A 2-year-old boy, Jasper Wu, was killed in the same way. He and his family his family was driving him on the 580. This was last year. And there was a shootout between 2 gangs and 2 cars on the 580. And one of the bullets passed through Jasper Wu's car, struck him in the brain, right in front of his mother. This is happening all the time. And I just think there's something. I know the overall, and Oakland's crime rate is in the top 10 in the country. It's not the top, it's not number 1 or number 2, but I think that overall, with the homelessness and the kinds of crime that are happening, there's something different here. And it's worse, I want to say, in some fundamental qualitative ways than possibly any other city in the country. It is truly, in parts of it, it really is third world in the way that it feels and the danger you feel when you're on the street. And I have lived in New York City, Los Angeles, and here. Okay. So I know of what I speak when it comes to big cities. Never felt scared in those cities. It's very different here.
Well, I do want to tie this to World War III. This was a clip I wanted to play last week, but this was the moment that the Pence campaign was dead on arrival when Tucker was interviewing him. And Pence was talking about how much we need to stand up for Ukraine and keep supporting them. And Tucker pointed out, hey, our cities are crumbling, they're collapsing, crime is getting out of hand, infrastructure is crazy. Why aren't you care about them at all? And yeah, this is like the big dividing moment for the Republican race right now.
Along the way, the Biden administration has been slow in providing military support. Make no mistake about this. We promised them 33 Abrams tanks in January. I heard again 2 weeks ago in Ukraine, they still don't have them. We've been telling them we'll train their F-16 pilots, but now they're saying maybe January we'll let somebody transfer some jets.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, have you, I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years. Yeah. Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, like, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern. I'm running for president of the United States because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think
He misspoke. He said later that he didn't mean exactly that, about that not being his concern. But yeah, I mean, the depiction of American cities by the right wing in recent years has been at times hysterical, I would say, especially from Trump, but it hasn't been all incorrect. And a lot of it's been spot on. In parts of many American cities, it does look like Gotham City. And the homelessness, I mean, that statistic, I think it's in the SF Gate today. People can look it up. The table of homelessness rates for all the American cities. I mean, if we have something like half of all the homeless in California, we have, I think, something like half of all the homeless of the United States live in California, are in California. It's that bad. And also, we have a lot of people, certainly in the Bay Area, who will actually not report crimes because it's white supremacist to report a crime. So the number of unreported crimes is probably pretty great. and if you included those in the statistics, in the crime statistics, Mike Pence and Donald Trump would be pretty correct, I think, at least about my hometown, and maybe others as well. But the overall numbers, we have to be really clear about this. The overall numbers are not that bad. There was an uptick during COVID, of course, but you look at the overall murder numbers, it's still way down from what it was 20 years ago. Way down, like a lot down. So these claims that these are like historic numbers are really, really disingenuous by the right wing, by the conservatives. But there are things that are happening, not just with crime, but as I said, like with homelessness and just quality of life in general. When I see these videos of shopping centers in Moscow and just the streets in Moscow, I mean, I think, holy Christ. And I was in Moscow. I was in Moscow during the Soviet Union.
So you are currently applying for citizenship then?
I mean, Jesus, that's what I was getting to. Why not? My friend who's going to prison in a month and a half for trying to sell ecstasy. We were thinking for a minute there of him absconding to Russia, but no, why not? I mean, Edward Snowden's there not because he loves Vladimir Putin, but because he knows that Putin will protect him. But yeah, I just think the quality of life is my point. The quality, if you're looking for good quality of life, I think you don't want to look at right now America or Western Europe. The UK is in a recession now, an official recession, and by all accounts, Germany is in worse than a recession. And meanwhile, the Russian economy is actually growing. Putin announced that it's up 2% this year. But boy, I've seen lots of videos in Russian cities that they don't look like sanctions are doing much. The Russian economy certainly looks outwardly just fine. So,
yeah. Well, in relation to that clip, I know that Pence misspoke in that if he was a perfect politician, he'd give a more perfect answer to give more clarity to what Tucker was saying. But I think it was at least a Freudian slip in that his priorities are obviously on being the leader of the quote free world and being the world police, and that the cities and these domestic concerns don't even pop into his brain as far as being president.
Oh, is that what he meant?
That's what it felt like to me.
That domestic, why would domestic issues not be his concern?
Well, he said that's not my concern when Tucker was talking about the cities. And I know he said that he misspoke on that, but it really revealed, in my opinion, his intentions, in that he then goes on to, and as he did prior, list specific grievances about Ukraine. Oh, we haven't given them enough training. We haven't given them these number of tanks. We haven't given them these weapons. And when it comes to domestic issues, he just talks in this flowery language and doesn't really have any agenda. He just says we can support our cities at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, what separates the establishment from all the rest of us is that right there. It's what we think about U.S. foreign policy, NATO, military bases, nation building, regime change, all that stuff. All of us dissidents, we all agree on that. That's the one thing we all agree on. We are opposed to that stuff. And the establishment is still defined by a commitment to the American exceptionalist dream, which has been there since the founding, as I've always said, of America ruling the world as a benevolent empire that will uplift all nations, all peoples into our way of life, our culture, our creed, our civic religion. We will all become Americans. And that's Mike Pence. He's from the establishment wing of the Republican Party. He was raised with that belief. You have in households like that, I mean, you have the Bible and you have the Declaration of Independence. You have Jesus and you have the founding fathers. You start there, and everything, all of your politics flows from those two things. And they are Christianity and American exceptionalism are, of course, one and the same. American exceptionalism is simply a secular form of Christianity in which the nation state becomes the savior. So, yeah, I mean, I get it. that's his religion. And so that comes first. Ukraine is the most important thing. It's more important than 2-year-old boys getting shot on the freeways in Oakland for him. I get it. But boy, they're both so infuriating. God, a lot of killing.
So you were talking about how you don't like some people on our side, foreign policy wise, when it comes to just their motivations potentially. When you said some of them might be a little bit too loyal to Russia.
I still like them, and I still listen to them, and I still think they're valuable, and I still think they're right almost all the time. I just don't like, I guess I would say, what I perceive to be certainly, at the very least, pro-Russian partisanship. Certainly, they're definitely guilty of that, and I don't like that. Mm-hmm. But I think it's even worse for some of them. I think that some of them are actually, I'm afraid to say, like, on the take. So.
Well, I have some problems with the new left-wing types that we've been surrounding ourselves with, in that they have the same prioritization of victim consciousness with everything. We're about to drop the Meg's Maker panel, and Max Blumenthal goes on for a while about the victims in Syria, and which is kind of irrelevant to the film, and this lamenting about how our foreign policy experts are blood-soaked monsters. You hear that a lot from libertarians, that all these people are blood-soaked monsters who just want to kill, kill, kill. And they really miss the point of what motivates these people, and they fall into these really dumb victim narratives.
Yeah, no, there's a secular Christianity on the left also, and the people you're talking about, yeah, I mean, I think they can be victim to that as well. Again, I think they generally are right about foreign policy questions, but yeah, their concerns I often wonder about. Like, why is it their feelings? Like, why are their feelings so intense about Syrians and not so intense about people who live near them? I mean, what is that? If you don't know those people and will never see them, never meet them, never know them, but you cry, about their death.
It's the same impulse as the neocons. It's the impulse to save the world.
Yeah, but if an American like down the street dies in a car crash, you might not even care. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Or I mean, no, it's the victims of injustice that people on the left cry about. They could be Americans too, right? No, Here's the one. This is the thing. It's white people who are victims of state violence. That's who they don't care about. White people with wrong politics. If you are a redneck white guy, they don't give a shit what the cops do to you. Cops could string your ass up, light you on fire, and then desecrate your body, and the left would not care. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just been seen over and over again. I've tried to make this point. Every time some white person gets killed or beaten up by the cops, and there's video of it, I always put it on Twitter and make a point about it, because it still disgusts me to this day that, and it still happens. It's a callousness, and I don't even know what that means. It means they don't care about human beings. They care about people as symbols, right? The black person is a symbol representing injustice. So,
well, for example, you were talking about the tenacity of Japanese Americans, how in just a few generations from being literally in concentration camps, or the victims of the biggest firebombing campaign ever.
Yep.
That in a few generations, after never seeing themselves as victims, they are pretty much some of the more wealthy, more educated, more successful people in the West. You don't really hear a lot of Japanese Americans, unless they're like 19 years old and in college, talk about being a victim.
I just had a weird thought about that, which is that actually I've studied this. And so as of World War II, up until the internment camps, one of the reasons for the internment camps was that Roosevelt and the government were actually correct about the attitudes of a lot of Japanese Americans. A lot of them are absolutely aligned with Japan. Of course they were. They identified with the emperor. They supported the emperor. They supported Japan, and they saw the United States as, guess what? A colonizing, oppressive power. there were a lot of them, and who lived in America, who, yes, most certainly would have committed espionage and sabotage for the Japanese if they'd been allowed to be free. This is something that we all need to deal with. Like, the logic of the war dictated, once you're in the war, you have to lock up the Japanese. The whole left that supported the war, they all supported internment. The Communist Party of the United States of America supported Japanese internment because you can't support the war and be opposed to Japanese internment, because yes, indeed, they would have blown up our buildings. Some of the people in those camps would have absolutely committed espionage during World War II right here in the American homeland. There's no doubt about it. Read about it, look it up. Yes, I know she's like a right-wing yada yada, but Michelle Malkin actually brings the evidence, and it's irrefutable. She has a book on this. But I also have it in Renegade History in my chapter on World War II. I actually condense a lot of the evidence right there. That's probably the better place to go, because you can get it in a couple pages. Japanese Americans were, by and large, much more aligned with Japan than they were with the United States during World War II, and were therefore absolutely liable to be agents of Japan, of the Japanese government in the war. There's no doubt about it. That's why they locked them up. The logic of it made sense.
Hey, some people are asking in the chat, why weren't Germans interned? Weren't Germans interned as well? Just not to the same extent, I think, because we had a bigger front as the United States.
The answer is easy, and you just have to understand the history of American immigration and assimilation and ethnicity. So the Germans were totally assimilated by 1941. Totally. German Americans, there was no like German culture here. They all spoke English. They all spoke American English. Remember, the major German immigration was all 19th century. All 19th century, mostly even early 19th century. So most German Americans by 1941 were like second, third, fourth, fifth generation already. Thoroughly Americanized, very little loyalty. There was tiny little German Bund groups in the US. The biggest one, which was like 20 dudes, I think, was in Santa Monica in the mountains. My son and I used to go hiking by there all the time. They got at the very beginning of the war, I think it was the day one of the war, the FBI raided their headquarters and arrested every one of them and put them in prison, not concentration camps, prison. So yeah, the German-American opposition was so small that they got prison instead of concentration camps. So no, it's absolutely logical. Internment was absolutely logical within the logic of the war. This is not why you support internment, everybody. This is why you oppose the war. And I mean retrospectively. I mean World War II. You have to oppose U.S. entry into the war if you're going to oppose U.S. internment of the Japanese. It's the only logical, politically consistent position to take. Sorry.
So you heard it here first. The students at Tiananmen Square had it coming, and it was completely logical and rational and justified to lock up the Japanese.
Nope, not exactly, but yeah, sure. Yeah. But see, the thing is, those things within the logic of empire and war do make sense on my terms. And all it does is, it's not like you have to be very stupid to think that I'm justifying internment or imperialism. And actually, these are the deepest critiques of those very things. To say that to show that Tiananmen Square was actually a provocation by the CIA, all that is a deeper critique of U.S. empire and how its tentacles extended even deep into the so-called pro-democracy movements among students in China. Just everywhere, right? It's that pernicious and pervasive. And the logic about internment is not a defensive internment. It's a condemnation of fucking war, and especially total war, and especially World War II, a war that never should have been fought, never had to be fought, and the U.S. certainly never had to be involved. And if the U.S. had never been involved, half of the people who died would have died. And the Japanese never would have been interned. And the Japanese living in Japan would not have had their cities firebombed and their children incinerated. And I could go on. And by the way, the Holocaust would not have happened. How about that? If the United States did not enter the war, the Holocaust, absolutely, no question about it, would not have happened. And I'll be proving that very shortly. But anyway, this has been fun.
Yeah.
Ukraine is going down, by the way. The offensive is completely going nowhere. The current line is that yes, meaning the line of the Western governments in Ukraine is yes, we have made no gains, and I think it's 3 weeks now of a counteroffensive. But that's because we're holding holding in reserve all of our major forces, and we're going to launch the real offensive coming soon. So, you know, we're all now waiting for this one. But
real quick,
yeah,
what's the deal on the grain silos? Were those things blown up? Is that
yeah? No, they blew up every single port in Odessa, so there's no grain coming out of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very complicated story, but yeah. So meanwhile, every report indicates that it's hundreds of Ukrainian guys getting killed every day. Every day, 3 digits. The number that's basically been confirmed about deaths since the offensive is, get this, 26,000 Ukrainians. It's just, and they're not going to win. They never were going to win. They're just now, and you can see this in the West. Okay, let me say this. Let me take 2 minutes real quick. This is because this is the most important thing, and almost no one knows this, and this will tell you.
Fishing is the most important thing, Thad. Fishing.
Yeah, I know. No, I agree. Yeah. And sex too. So the Council on Foreign Relations and the Rand Corporation are by far the most important and influential and powerful think tanks within the State Department and the Defense Department and the White House. Those foreign policy establishments listen very closely and often employ, literally directly, people from the CFR and Rand. Okay. The CFR literally wrote the war plans for World War II, and Rand literally wrote the war plans for Vietnam. Okay. So guess what happened? The Council on Foreign Relations, headed by Richard Haass, in April had secret meetings with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, and other Russian officials, seeking some kind of negotiated settlement. A few months earlier, last fall actually, the Rand Corporation came out with a report saying that essentially Ukraine could not win this war. This was the first crack in the Western edifice. This was the first time they indicated any kind of pessimism about Ukraine's chances. Rand came right out and said it. They did the research. They saw that the Russian military was just too dominant. And that without NATO boots on the ground, there was no way Ukraine could win this war. Okay.
All right.
So we found out that Richard Haass led this meeting with Lavrov. And then it just came out last week that Richard Haass, CFR, also wrote the Rand report about how Ukraine can't win this war. Now, if the CFR and Rand think you can't win this war, I guarantee you absolutely there are many, many, many people in the State Department, the Defense Department, and the White House, and probably even including Biden now, who know that they can't win this war. And all they are doing right now is having fights among each other about how to end it. They're trying to figure out how to wind this down, losing the least face as possible and leaving the Russians as weakened as possible. But Russia holds the upper hand, and they're not going to let it go. And so essentially they're going to keep fighting this war until the last Ukrainian, when Russia can literally dictate the terms to the West and tell them, we're going to take what we want and you're going to give it to us. Because right now, if you look at videos, everybody please go look at any video of any Ukraine infantry regiment, any soldiers who are actually in the trenches in Ukraine right now, the Ukrainian soldiers, they have gray beards now. Like, it's many of them. I saw this horrible video of a guy getting blown up with a grenade last week. Gray beard. I think we might have shown it. This is because, guess what? Yeah, all the young men have been killed. All the young, good fighters have been killed or wounded. 200,000 killed. Don't even know the number of wounded, but it's usually like 3 or 4 times X that. So, you know, you're talking about roughly 500,000 of their soldiers are out of commission. They're drafting old men. They're drafting old men and now teenagers. The U.S. no longer has enough munitions to send them, regular munitions, so they got to send them cluster bombs. Yeah, there's a humanitarian horror there, but it must be noted, and here's my friend Jerry on Twitter. It's a shout out to Jerry. Yeah, Russia's been using cluster munitions, I think, since the beginning of the war and probably since before. But so what? That's not even the major point here. The major point is, sure, it's yet another example of callousness on the part of the West, but maybe more importantly, it's just an indication that they're done. They have to give cluster munitions when even their own people are pissed off about this. A lot of the liberals and Democrats who are super pro-Ukraine have been very angry about these cluster munitions and were opposed to it. That's how desperate they are, is the point here. The point to be made is not, oh God, the US is so evil for sending cluster munitions. What's the difference between killing someone with a cluster munition and killing someone with a regular munition? I never understood this thing about like liberals getting all upset about like particular methods of war, like drone strikes are somehow worse than like a tank blowing up your village. I never understood that. No, the point to be made is that the West is down to the bottom of its barrel. And even they can't save Ukraine now. And it's been weeks of the offensive and they haven't gained a single meter of territory. And in fact, they've lost territory. Russia, as we all predicted back in the fall, is regaining the territory they lost in that bullshit Kharkiv offensive that everybody was shouting about how awesome it was. They captured a bunch of empty fields during the Kharkiv offensive mostly. But even the cities that they captured at the time, guess what? Russia's taking them back right now. They've taken, I think, 2 or 3 of the cities back in Kharkiv. So this is a god-awful, bloody, cynical mess. And, you know, if the Ukrainians want to continue dying at these rates and sending old men and boys into the field to get blown up by Russian artillery, if they want that, okay. I don't want to support it. I don't want to pay for it. But if they want that, go right ahead. You go rush into the Russian guns, you know, to make sure that the people of the Donbass and Crimea live under Ukrainian rule when they don't want to, when they want to be under Russian rule. Okay, you go do that. Go die for that cause, which is what it is for the Ukrainians. It's control over that territory. They want to have control over that territory and over those people and force those people to speak Russian and to exhibit and demonstrate no Russian culture. And to forbid Russian culture, literally. The racism that is rampant in Ukraine is anti-Russian racism. They are anti-Russian racists, meaning they are genocidal when it comes to Russian culture and language, and often the people themselves, but certainly the culture. The people of the East and the South in Ukraine are overwhelmingly Russian-speaking, Russian culture, Russian nationals. And so what is this for? It's to force them to be Ukrainian. We have a negotiated settlement right there in front of us on the map. You partition the goddamn country between East and West. You let the Kiev government have the West, which is 80% of the country, and you let Russia have the East. I have seen no indication of anybody in the East or the South being upset about Russian rule. I've seen lots of evidence that they've actually welcomed it, of course, because they were being shelled day and night for 8 years by the Ukrainian military, who killed more than 10,000 civilians in those places because those people wanted to be independent and wanted to be affiliated with Russia. Yeah. People in the West, though, I mean, like, they don't know any of this stuff. It's so hard because it's such a complicated story to tell, but that is the story. Look at CFR, look at the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass in particular, his behavior recently, and the RAND report from last fall, I think it was, maybe earlier, it's about 6 months ago. Yeah, no, they're throwing in the towel. They're throwing in the towel. They are just figuring out how to do it. And apparently in the Pentagon, the Defense Department, there's much more push to end the war fast. The State Department has all the neocons in it. And so they're the last. And Vicki Nuland is still like dug in entirely, of course. I'm not saying they've all given up. But everybody except the hardest neocons are trying to find a way to end this war. But it's over. It's over. As I said last week, Zelensky he's done. And the only question is whether he will be dead or in his villa in Miami at the end of this. But he's done. He's over. So there you go.
The chat is saying you missed some steamy sex scenes in Oppenheimer.
Oh, shit. Then I'll go see it. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. All right.
The only other thing that can keep me from fishing is another super chat. Handyman Tennessee LLC with the 10. His litmus test for a new friendship is based off whether or not they've read The Renegade History of the United States, spelled out as Throtus. If not, I give them a copy and tell them, get back to me when they finished.
It's a renegade history, so it's Arotus, actually. But thank you, Handyman. That's awesome. That's doubly awesome. Thank you for the super chat, and thank you for that amazing commendation of my book. Yeah. Go check it out. If you want to understand Japanese internment, it's a good place to start. So,
I tell everybody, no matter what, you'll find one chapter that you absolutely love and makes you want to frame the book, and another book chapter that will make you want to burn it. So,
ooh, you wanted to burn my book, Michael?
Well, there's a chapter or two.
You gotta tell me sometime.
Yeah.
No, I've heard that a lot, and that's the highest compliment. Of course. Yeah. If you don't challenge someone, what are you really doing? Preaching to the choir? No. Yes, I piss off everybody. That's my specialty.
Yeah, but in different ways. Which is fun.
Everybody come join us at Unregistered Live after Unreported. Michael and I go over to have a Zoom meeting with all of our patrons. And so if you want to become a patron and hang out with us for an hour and a half right now, every Thursday we do this, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Join at any level and click on the URL that's in the Patreon comments. So it's fun. It's awesome. We hang out. Been doing this for years. We've been doing Unregistered Live, I think now it started early pandemic. So it's like 3 years now. Every Thursday night. It's awesome. Michael, great show. Great show. Everybody go find the video of the naked lady shooting guns at people on the freeway, my hometown. Showing out, as they say. All right. Peace.
Yep. Peace.